crises, for example, like sea level rise. But whether you're bombing trains in Madrid or Katrina or the Minneapolis Bridge or the swine flu epidemic or the blackout in the Northeast, Bombay getting flooded, the financial crisis, terrorist attacks, I'll say something very blunt. None of the visions that we had of the future of transportation last night paid much attention to any of this. It's as if the world's just going to go on being very nice, and we don't have to factor this in to our designs for the future. So this morning's session is asking you to think differently once again. And we're thinking about the black swans. Now, Nicholas Taleb, a former Wall Street derivative trader who was very prescient on the financial crisis, this book, The Black Swan, he argues a very important message for all of us. The world is no longer governed by the predictable. The world is no longer governed by the average Gaussian bell curve. But the world is now governed by the random, by the unknowable, by the unpredictable, by the outliers, by long tails, by big extreme events or discoveries of unusual people that have big consequences. None of us want to accept that mentally, because that is painful, very, very painful, to accept that we're moving into the age of the unthinkable, which is the title of another new book. The emphasis, he says, stop focusing on specifics and the minutiae. Get your mind to focus on the generalities, the large patterns, right? Stop concentrating on what we know and devote the rest of your life to concentrating on what you don't know. Stop simplifying and categorizing existing knowledge and start imagining the impossible. Stop reading the New York Times, he says, and go outside of the box. It's a marvelous book, but he's predicting that we are moving into the world of extremistan. Extremistan. So what does extremistan imply for the future of urban transport and accessibility? Well, here is your data. This is you speaking, and it was a 5-point scale, but a 4 meant very likely to happen. So this crowd, at least in the survey results, is predicting a fairly high probability of increased frequency and severity of hurricanes, oil price shocks, additional financial crises, oil supply interruptions, water scarcities, intense precipitation events, extreme heat waves, and so on. That is a pretty dire prediction of this audience about what 40% of humanity is going to be experiencing in the coastal, I guess there are about 4,000 major coastal cities in this world. And as we predicted earlier in the conference, there's going to be massive migration from the countryside, largely into coastal megacities, into the slums of those cities. And there's a painful paradox that those people will be moving into floodplains and other areas high at risk of climate problems. Now, if a group like this is in agreement that the future looks pretty scary, and I would have to tell you that this view is in accord with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So you might want to go back to the 2007 results of those 3,000 climate scientists. There's a whole chapter on the impact of climate change on transportation systems, on urban infrastructure systems, and their predictions are very close to ours. So we are in agreement with the most statured climate scientists of our time. Yet, you talk to Stephen Flynn at the Council for Foreign Relations, This is a very scary book, The Edge of Disaster. He says the United States has learned nothing from Katrina or from 9/11. That's an extreme statement, but we have not yet adapted in the way that he thinks we should. He's a former Coast Guard kind of a guy, but that's a strong message. And he has a chapter in there of what Homeland Security says. They say less than 10% of American cities are prepared for events like this. That's a pretty scary statistic as well. So what is resilience? It really started out in the field of engineering, and it's largely about bouncing back to the original position. The field of ecology has a slightly different interpretation. It's learning how to absorb those shocks and perturbations, but keeping your functioning going, but also using the shocks to develop and move on and to reorganize. So if you're really interested in the whole concept of resilience, go either to the Santa Fe Institute that Scott will be able to talk about in a moment, or go to the new Stockholm Resilience Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. They have amassed the world's best collection of intellects on resilience, and there's all kinds of downloads and videos and so on. The very simple model that I have been using in my own teaching is that resilience is some complex interaction of really deep learning capacity, but also reducing your vulnerabilities, but at the same time building up your creative renewal capacities. Now, you can do too much learning, you can do too much vulnerability reduction, and you can do too much creativity. And there are obviously real tensions here between fortifying yourself and moving on with creative things. So nobody really knows how this works yet. The learning has to support both of these, but we really need really wise management of those inner tensions. This is your set of criteria for building a resilient urban mobility accessibility system. What's interesting is that there is a fairly nice correspondence with your vision of what a sustainable system looked like. So we get renewable energy reliance, network connectivity, modal diversity, and so on.